Whenever I give a lecture, I show pictures from, let's say, from the Hubble Space Telescope, a picture of a cluster of galaxies. I mean, the poetry of it, the poetry, well, we've both talked about the poetry of science, but the spiritual inspiration you get from looking at a picture of a cluster of galaxies located 5 billion light years away from us, where every dot in that picture is a galaxy. The light from those stars left those stars before our sun and Earth formed, which means that now many of the stars in that picture don't exist anymore. And if there were civilizations around those stars, each of those galaxies contains 100 billion stars. Any civilization that existed around those stars no longer may exist. It just opens your mind to wonder. And so I actually feel very strongly that while science per se may not provide the direct consolation, it can and it should provide a spiritual, not only wonder, but it should provide a consolation. Look, when we talked about this last night, we tell our kids fairy tales to console them. We tell to make their life fun. We talk about Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, but then we decide that, you know what, it's better for them to know how the world really works. And it may be a little less consoling, but in fact, knowing that they're in control of their lives actually is empowering. And many of us, if you're a good parent, you want to teach your kids how to become empowered. And yet, but religion, and in religion, they're often talked about the flock, the children. It effectively treats you like a child. It says, it's better for you to believe a fable than reality. And often when I end a lecture on cosmology, I point out that the two things modern cosmology has taught us is that first, you're much more insignificant than you ever thought, and two, that the future is miserable. But that should make you feel good, not bad, because it further enhances exactly what you were talking about. We are so lucky to be alive today and endowed with a consciousness where we, for whatever fortuitous reasons, on a random star in a random galaxy in the middle of nowhere, we are able to evolve a consciousness, live on a relatively quiescent planet. And so I actually think science can provide a real consolation by saying, look, once you accept reality, it's liberating.
First of all, what you've demonstrated is that when you thrust religion down the throats of children, which is child abuse, before they even have these are deep, you know, you're a man who spent most of your life studying the deep questions of theology. They're deep questions. They're not something, you know, you don't talk about libertarianism or conservative ideals to a 3-year-old, but you force this down when they're a 3-year-old. It's very, very difficult to abandon those things. It's very difficult for any of us who were brought up in a religious house to completely abandon those notions, because when you're a child, you don't have the cognitive abilities, and in fact, these things just become dogma. But the other thing that you suggest, which somehow this myth that is pervaded by both of you, is that somehow there's this connection between religion and science. There isn't. Those, you know, there are groups that study religion and science, and they talk to other groups that study religion and science. The point is that I have been a scientist for 30 years, and I've never been, not once, to a scientific meeting, a scientific seminar, a scientific class where the word God has been mentioned. It's just irrelevant. As Steven Weinberg says, most scientists don't even think enough about God to know if they're atheists. Look, well, okay, I mean, it's a stereotype to suggest that people of faith are not good people. Of course, that's ridiculous. And just like it's a stereotype to say people of no faith are not good people, which unfortunately in certain parts of the world is a death sentence because of religion.
Why is it wrong to cause pain to other members of your species?
You can ask,
animals do that all the time.
The point is, all of these things are based on rationality. It's this, the laws of this country are not framed on Christian principles. They're framed on rational arguments about what causes the greatest benefit for the greatest number of people. There's nothing Christian about it, or Jewish about it, or Islamic about it. It's based on rationality.
Too often, you're right, science does not provide meaning for people, or awe, or a sense of wonder. And we do too poor a job of explaining it. Science is presented, mostly by science teachers who are uncomfortable with it, as being something you need to memorize or something you need to do to get a better job, or something like that.
Science is not presented as something that provides not just amazing ideas, but a wonderful story. A story that, in fact, for many scientists competes with the Bible in a very effective way, to be blunt about it. And the problem is, and I've gone to a lot of fundamentalist colleges in this country, and I think I've had more impact there when I make the simple statement that you don't have to not believe in God to believe in evolution. And the reason I have an impact there is I have students come up to me that have told me their entire lives, every single Sunday, they've heard the opposite. So the problem science has is, first, that we're not doing a good enough job presenting the awe and wonder of science, but secondly, it is being attacked week in and week out by people who fear it. And against such an attack, the data has a very, when you tell people, if you accept this theory, you're not going to believe in God, people will turn their minds off. And young people especially will turn their minds off. And it's not surprising, therefore, that most people in this country don't believe in evolution, because they've been told a lie. And by the way, that's the reason I had this, that's the reason I had this picture here, by the way. And you should go to the web, go to NASA website. This is not a painting, this is a picture, this is a photograph from Cassini of Saturn. It's a total eclipse of the sun, a scene from Saturn. But the thing that's most amazing, and this projector doesn't have the resolution to see it, if you look at this picture, in that picture, right there, you'll see a little dot, a pale blue dot, which of course is the Earth. And it seems to me that is the wonder we should be telling your kids about, showing them pictures of understanding our place in the cosmos, the Earth, the center where all of our vital trials and tribulations of political battles and moral battles are being fought, is that little spot, that fragile spot in a dark void. I mean, that's the kind of story we should be telling to inspire our children. And I agree with you, we're not doing a good enough job doing it.
Science changes what we mean by words. And it changes that meaning because we learn about the universe. We actually make progress in science, unlike theology. And that's because we can be wrong, and we can learn, and we learn from the universe. So if we ask the question, and I think perhaps the most offensive thing I said, and it was initially at the beginning, is that something and nothing are not theological or philosophical quantities. They're physical quantities. Most people recognize that something is a physical quantity, but they refuse to accept the idea that nothing might be a physical quantity, somehow the absence of something. And so what is remarkable and surprising in some sense how there's been a reaction to it is, in this particular book, what I tried to do was not attack theological notions, but celebrate our changing picture of reality, the amazing discoveries that have been made over the last 50 years, some by people here, by my friend Brian Schmidt here, who won the Nobel Prize for his discovery, that have changed completely our picture of the universe and made it plausible, the most remarkable and unexpected thing you can imagine, that you could start with absolutely nothing. That means, unlike the cardinal said, and unlike some people argue, no particles, but not even empty space, no space whatsoever, and maybe even no laws governing that space. And we can plausibly understand how you could arrive without any miracles, without any need for a creator, without any supernatural creation, you could produce everything we see. And I find that the fact that it's plausible, remarkable, in the same sense that I think I found it plausible when I first learned about evolution. The amazing fact that the diversity of life on Earth, which seems so designed and complex, could arise from so simple a beginning.
Human beings were clearly programmed by evolution to impute intentionality to the world around them. Meaning and purpose was infused in all everyday events to make sense of a dangerous, difficult, and uncaring world. So we had rituals behind the sun, the moon, the planets, the wind, the earth, the oceans, in all societies. The rise of our physical understanding has slowly caused us to do away with those many gods. We no longer have Mars, the god of war, Poseidon, the Greek god of the sea, Thor, the god of storms. As Michael has said, everyone here, or maybe everyone, is now an atheist with respect to those gods. And there's a reason for that. Science has taught us that instead of capricious beings, there's an order to nature. And that order does not appear to involve a divinity. There's no need for a divinity. Laws of nature describable by mathematics make predictions that allow us to not only predict the future, but control it without the need for any supernatural shenanigans. And in fact, it amazes me that asking the question, is God necessary, is somehow an evil thing. When we stop asking questions, that will be an evil thing. Science has taught us also that we want to believe, in the words of Fox Mulder. And we should be skeptical of those desires. As the physicist Richard Feynman told us, the easiest people to fool are ourselves. As scientists, we have to train ourselves to be skeptical of wanting to believe. And we should try and overcome our natural tendency to assume special significance to events. And human beings are also inevitably programmed to ask why, as we've heard it. But the why question is ill-posed, because it presumes purpose. It presumes the answer to the question before you ask the question. What if there is no purpose? Does there need to be purpose? And science tells us there's no evidence of purpose. So the why question is ill-posed. Our opponents want to keep the clock from ticking by avoiding the evidence of reality. And therefore, science, by telling us there's no need for purpose, has refuted the need for God, and that's why you should support our position.
It seems to me that everything science examines shows us more beauty and complexity to the universe we live in. When you think about it philosophically, this amazing complexity points towards an intelligent first cause. Well, I mean, that's how it works with humans, you know. Only intelligent minds can create complex things. Isn't it bad parenting to force your children to learn that people evolved from the ancestors of monkeys without letting them have the opportunity to think about it logically and come to their own conclusion?
Well, look, I don't think you should force kids to do anything, but what you should try and do is explain to them how the world works and give them evidence, and in fact, ask them to try and understand the world through evidence, okay? Now, the point is, the evidence tells us, it's not a matter of opinion, the evidence tells us that evolution happened, okay? And in fact, it's the basis of modern biology, it's the basis of modern drug development. And I agree with you that science tells us, I mean, just makes the world fascinating and far more interesting than myth. And in fact, I get upset when people say that science isn't spiritual. I get spiritual wonder looking at every Hubble Space Telescope picture. And science, in fact, is better kind of spirituality because it's real. And I think that's the important thing. So you're absolutely right. I don't think parents should force kids to do anything. But what they should try and do is encourage kids to learn and provide them the best available knowledge base. And it is unfortunate that some people, for some reason, as you seem to do, fear the notion of the fact of the reality that humans that all species descended from a common ancestor. It's just unequivocal. It's the best tested theory in science. And it's not, we don't hold to it because we have some secret handshake. If it were wrong, it'd be great, because the way to become famous in science is to prove your colleagues wrong.
If we had no religion, how would we do without King's College Chapel, the Sistine Chapel, etc.? Well, you know, artists have to make a living. And in the time when the Sistine Chapel was built and its ceiling was painted, you know who had the money. Artists such as Michelangelo had to go where the patronage was. We shall never know the ceiling that Michelangelo might have painted if he had been commissioned to paint the Museum of Science, for example. We shall never know what Haydn's Evolution Oratorio might have sounded like, or Beethoven's Mesozoic Symphony.
Science claims more than method. In fact, it claims to offer us a future hope. But in and of itself, science has no ethical boundaries. What are the values, if God and faith are to be excluded, that will actually measure the impact of science on human life?
Well, I think it's wrong to say that science has no ethical boundaries. Science is based on telling the truth, which is a really important ethical boundary. It's one that I don't think religion shares, in fact. The point is that telling the truth and full disclosure, and also doubting yourself, being skeptical of your, because the easiest person to fool is yourself. And I think all those values are, in fact, the very values we need for a better society. All those things, if any of those things were true in my country, in Washington, it would be a better place. And so I think that science can offer a better world, and in fact, a world that's more ethical. And to the extent that you talk about morality, then you can get from books written based on Iron Age peasants who didn't even know the Earth orbited the sun. I really think that, in fact, if you look at democracies and science has not flourished in countries that don't have democracies. And democracy can't function without the very things that science is based on: an informed public, an informed legislature, basically who base public policy on empirical facts instead of ideology. And that's very important.
Firstly, is religion true? And second, is it necessary for human psychological welfare or something of that sort? If it isn't true, then for anybody to maintain that somehow humans need it and you're wasting your time trying to get rid of it, what an amazingly patronizing and condescending thing to say. We intellectuals, of course, know that it's not true, but all those poor people out there, they need religion. I mean, what a condescending thing to say about all those people. Either it's true or it's not. And I have enough respect for people to say that if it's not true, people will reconcile themselves to that and will not find any need for it. Now, I was asked a specific question: is it in the genes? Is there some Darwinian reason for religiosity? Maybe there is, but that doesn't bear in the slightest degree on whether it's true. I care about whether it's true. I don't like it when people say, oh, humans need it, or we have it built into us in our genes, or Darwinian natural selection is built into it. Therefore, that somehow validates it. Of course it doesn't validate it. It merely says that it's been built into us by natural selection, just as all sorts of other probably disagreeable things have been built into us. Doesn't mean we can't try to cure ourselves. A quote from Kurt Wise, who is an American geologist. He studied geology at Harvard, no less, under Stephen Jay Gould, no less. And he was set for a good career as an academic geologist, which all his life he had desperately wanted. The problem was, it came from within. It was his religious upbringing, his firewall of faith. And he couldn't reconcile the two, his scientific education with his religion. And he literally got a pair of scissors and went right through the Bible and cut out every verse that would have to go if he accepted his scientific education. And in the end, he decided there was nothing left of his Bible. He therefore tossed out science and said, and from then on, he said, with that in great sorrow, I tossed into the fire all my dreams and hopes in science. And he goes on, I am a young age creationist because that is my understanding of the scripture. As I shared with my professors years ago when I was in college, if all the evidence in the universe turns against creationism, I would be the first to admit it, but I would still be a creationist because that is what the Word of God seems to indicate. Here I must stand. If religion can do that to a highly educated Harvard geologist, just think what it can do to an average school child or student. Thank you.
So when I say, as the subtitle of my book, that I think religion poisons everything, I'm not just doing what publishers like and coming up with a provocative subtitle. I mean to say it infects us in our most basic integrity. It says we can't be moral without Big Brother, without a totalitarian permission. It means we can't be good to one another. It means we can't think without this. We must be afraid. We must also be forced to love someone who we fear. The essence of sadomasochism. The essence of abjection. The essence of the master-slave relationship. And that knows that death is coming and can't wait to bring it on. I say this is evil. And though I do some nights stay home, I enjoy more the nights when I go out and fight against this ultimate wickedness and ultimate stupidity. Thank you.
Shouldn't my children be taught, what was it, self-restraint, responsibility, care for others, and so on? I don't believe in the rest of it, don't believe in the prophets, don't believe in the mountaintop, don't believe in the revelation. Well, nor should you. But how dare you suggest to us we couldn't teach our children self-restraint and respect for others and the golden rule. How dare you?
There are no objective moral values in the universe. There are not. We make values in our brain. A value is a function of a brain that's functioning. Just like digestion is the function of the stomach, thought and value is a function of a computing brain that you admit works, right? But we make values based upon what we need to survive, what we need to enhance our lives, what we need to avoid pain in our lives. And we make comparisons of those values. When the brains die, the values go away. They don't exist. They are not things. A value is relative to an organism. But most atheists will say, and I don't speak for all atheists, most atheists will say that values can be objectively justified. They're not objective values, because to be a value is a function of a brain, of a mind, right? But to be objective means to exist independently of a mind. So how can you have something in the mind that exists independently of a mind? That's an oxymoron. You cannot have an objective value. You can have values that you can objectively justify by looking at your actions. And all of us do this. Christians, Jews, Muslims, humanists, atheists, agnostics, we all do this. We are all basically humanists. We are all basically situational ethicists in our daily lives. And so is the Bible. If you look at some of those decisions in the Bible, they were situationally justified. Rahab was praiseworthy for the lie that she told. But you have more than one option for your actions. How much harm does this one cause? How much harm does this one cause? And if you have time, you try to weigh those actions and say, if I'm going to be a moral person, I'm going to pick the path that results in the least amount of harm. That's what morality is. It's not some big objective thing. And we flatter ourselves to think that we are somehow special in the cosmos. It's much more meaningful to accept who we really are. We are not egotistical. We should humble ourselves and realize we are part of nature. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that wonderful that we can function in this way? We are social animals.
So the 5-year-old goes into the living room, and about a minute later you hear this loud crash. And she comes running back out and says, I didn't break the lamp. I didn't break the lamp. A ghost did it. It happened by itself. I didn't break the lamp. You heard the crash, but you weren't there. You have her testimony, right? And so you have on the table her testimony that there's some supernatural explanation for what happened to the lamp. But as a parent, can you think of what other options would you think of? Right? Maybe she's fibbing. Or there could be other natural hypotheses. Maybe she tripped over the cord, or maybe her brother's hiding behind it. Whatever. You have on the table an explanation that's supernatural and an explanation that's natural. Which one do we prefer? Which one do we go with? Even if you don't know, you weren't there. Which would you pick? Ghosts or a scared little girl, right? So Matt is proposing to us that the explanation for the universe is some transcendent, ghost, supernatural thing out there that explains everything. When we non-believers, atheists and agnostics, we can propose we weren't there at the beginning of the Big Bang. We weren't in the living room when the noise happened. But what we say in the natural world and in the scientific method is this: let's rule out all the natural explanations first before we just jump to a supernatural conclusion.
If there is a hell, and if the atheists get to the end of their life and discover, yep, I was wrong, there is a God. This is counterfactual. This is not that I actually believe it. Then you are right. I would then believe and know that there's a God, but that does not mean I would respect or admire a God who would create something like a hell to send someone like me to. And my beloved mother, Patsy Barker, who died as an atheist with a smile on her face, happy that she lived a good life raising 3 good boys. That deity is torturing her in hell, her and Mark Twain and George Gershwin and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Aaron Copland and Johannes Brahms and Prokofiev, Margaret Sanger, Bertrand Russell, Carl Sagan, wonderful people who lived these lives. You're telling me that the God you love and admire has consigned us to eternal torture? Then I would say to that God, you created hell, you go to hell. And if you want to torture me forever, fine. You prove what a big macho man you are. You do not have my respect. Of course, he doesn't exist. This is all hypothetical.
Okay, the comment that you made about your relatives going, your good relatives. Nobody gets to go to heaven because they're good. We get to go to heaven because God's good, only by God's grace.
By the way, let me point out something here. That question and the one before, you're both making a false assumption. You're both assuming that the words of the Bible are reliable and dependable. They are not. You have built your house on the sand. Those words are not a source of truth. The Bible is unhistorical and contradictory. If you have to base truth on a book that somebody wrote, then you don't even have a concept of how to find truth. Truth is not handed to us. We use reason, we use logic, we use investigation, so don't quote the Bible to me and think that it makes any difference. If the Bible says something is true, that probably means that it's false. The Bible says God is a spirit. Can you tell us what is a spirit? What is spirit?
It is a non-physical, incorporeal, ultimate mind.
But that doesn't answer the question. What is it? You told us what it is not. You said it is non-corporeal, non-physical. But positively, what is spirit? God is a spirit. Obviously, God is made of something, right? We can define what God is. So what is spirit?
That would be like asking, what is darkness? Well, it's the absence of light. What is cold? Well, it's the absence of heat. So in order to nail down exactly what God is, in fact, earlier you said, well, the people who are talking about design are arguing for a God of the gaps. We're supposedly saying that we don't know this piece of information, so we're inserting God. Well, here's what's happening in this, and this is a common question among atheists. We're inserting atheism in a gap of human knowledge. We don't know exactly what a spirit is. We know it's not, and we know how to define it. But because we don't know exactly what it is, the atheistic community has often inserted atheism as, we don't know what a spirit is. Thus, atheism must be true.
But you haven't defined it.
Oh, certainly.
No, you have not defined it. You have not told me what it is. And if it's just the absence of something, then it's nothing. Because cold is the absence of heat. Cold is nothing. Darkness is the absence of light. Darkness is nothing. So if God is a spirit, and the spirit is the absence of something, then God is nothing. I've never heard anyone define what a spirit is. It seems like circular thinking. You're assuming, aren't you assuming the very thing you're trying to prove? You're trying to prove there's a transcendent realm, and you're simply pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and using a word that has no definition. Why don't you just say God just without defining it, right? What is spirit? Well, let's move on here.
Was that a question?
Well, yeah, but you didn't twice you failed to define spirit or even explain what spirit is. So if you can't define it, how can we even discuss whether this thing exists?
The fact that life is short and that it's going to end makes it more valuable. We give greater value to things that are rare, don't we? Precious metals, precious things. If things are really rare, you can get a big price for it. I was looking for a 1943 copper penny. I thought I had one. I would get like $100,000 for it because it's so rare. When things are plentiful, their value goes down. So if life is eternal, then life is cheap. If it lasts forever and it never ever ends, then it doesn't have any real value that we would call precious. The fact that we face, like you said, we face the reality of the coldness and the uncaring universe that we live in, face it with bravery and with honesty and say, I'm going to die someday, that's going to be it. That actually gives your life more value now as you live it, because you're not sacrificing anything for some future rewards. You're living this life now. Of course, none of us are going to know after we're dead, we're dead. And of course, death is the cessation of a physical, biological organism. So I think most atheists who have that attitude actually value life more than someone like Trenton does, because Trenton thinks there's going to be this afterlife where everything's going to make everything right. We don't. We got to get it right now. We got to do things now while we're alive, and then maybe have some consolation in the fact that our descendants or future generations will benefit from some of the good that we do now. Ultimately, it's all going to go away. Ultimately, it is cosmically meaningless, but that doesn't mean it is not immediately immensely meaningful to us right now as we live our lives.
On the one hand, it doesn't really matter what religion somebody holds privately, as long as we all follow the principle of freedom. That is, the freedom to think and believe and act as we choose, so long as our beliefs and actions do not infringe on other people's freedoms to believe whatever they want. So as long as religion doesn't in any way interfere with my private life or public life, it's just a private matter, that's no problem. The problem is that the logic of religion is that it leads to belief in absolute moral principles that are true, which means that everybody else who disagrees with you must be wrong, and therefore they must be brought into the line. That is, every knee must bend to the truth. So as long as they don't believe that, we don't have a problem. But as you know, that is a problem. The propensity to believe that there are supernatural forces at work in the world is irrational. And if you believe that, what else do you believe? So that's my concern. And furthermore, the belief that this supernatural agent can impart to us absolute, real moral values that are true and everybody else's that don't agree with that are wrong, that makes it much more difficult for a functional democracy to operate, which requires considerable flexibility and nuanced thinking to understand the other guy's position and to compromise and go through the rough and tumble process of a democracy that an absolute moral system is not conducive to. Now, I mentioned Christianity's gone through an enlightenment. Most Christians are very tolerant. Nevertheless, the long-term trajectory over the last several centuries has been more and more secular liberal democracies. There were 0 in 1900. Not one country allowed women to vote. Now there's something on the order of 87 liberal democracies in the world. This is the long-term trend. Things are getting better, thanks mostly to the idea of expanding the moral sphere to include everybody in the tribe. And that's a value I claim that does not come from religion. That's an enlightenment value that we've more and more been embracing. To the extent that religions have made that transition, some of them, that's good. But the idea that they're leading that is not true historically. And so I think part of the problem with turning to our founding fathers is that they didn't have an answer that we have today. Well, I don't know where morals came from. They came from the Creator, however you mean that. Well, we don't have to make that argument anymore. We know where morals come from. We have a good evolutionary explanation for the origins of the moral sentiments and the historical trajectory of how we treat other people and so on. We can give that answer now. And so when the founding fathers set up the Republic to be self-governing, they believed that people need internally a self-governor, and they couldn't think of anything else other than religion because they didn't have an answer. Now we have an answer. We have good secular reasons for why. In other words, it's good to be nice to other people for goodness sake and for no other sake. It's just good to be kind to other people, and we should reinforce that for no other reason than in and of itself, it's a good moral value, regardless of what your religious beliefs are.
I'm often misconstrued as advocating that we pass laws against religious belief, that somehow we create some mechanism whereby we really turn down the screws on religious people. I'm not advocating that at all. I'm really advocating just new rules of conversation. I mean, ask yourself, what do we do with the astrologers? You know, I mean, how have we managed to keep astrologers off the Supreme Court or off our medical boards, but not out of the White House? Yeah, well, there's always marriage, the peril of marriage, perhaps. But by and large, astrologers are not acquiring vast responsibility in our society, and we're not continually ambushed by the neurosurgeon who doesn't want to perform surgery that day because Saturn is in retrograde or whatever. I mean, this is not happening. It's not happening because when someone talks with too much conviction about the effect of the planets on human affairs, we begin to stop listening to them. We stop taking them seriously. They don't get promoted. There's no laws involved. And I just think that should happen when people begin to express their certainty that Jesus is coming back in their lifetime, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you.
Beware of solipsism, as Dr. Oliphant was so kind as to remind you. Don't ever think you are the center of the world. Be very careful of assuming that you are the object of a divine design, that there's something special just about being you. That's all you have to prove. That why wouldn't a person such as yourself have God on their side? Why wouldn't it be? Of course God would care who I slept with, what I ate, what holy day I observed. Why would he not? Surely that's why the heavens are arranged in the starry beauty and array that the form they take. And then you read Hamlet's reflections with Yorick at the side of the grave, and you are forced to wonder if maybe, even though it's a less beautiful thought, it could be that the galaxies are not arranged with you in mind.
The greatest single predictor of anyone's religion is geography. Where you were born is the greatest predictor of what type of religion you might end up having. But just because something is prevalent in our species doesn't mean it's true. Sexism and racism are prevalent all across the planet. All across history, there have been human cultures that were fiercely racist, thinking that theirs was the best race and the others were either subhuman or inferior. Does the universality of a belief mean it's right? We have evolved a frontal lobe now which has reason. We've taught ourselves some things about how to rise above these instinctive tendencies that we might have to be racist or sexist or xenophobic or religious. We can rise above those things. Just, is truth determined by vote? Do we take a vote? Is there a God or isn't there? Raise your hands. Jerry said there is evidence that's testable, but he hasn't put it forth yet. He said it twice now, but he hasn't actually put it on the table. So the universality of a belief system doesn't mean it's true or false. It depends on what country you live in. If you live in Utah, let's all become Mormons. I mean, my goodness, the plurality there believes in the magic tablet and the magic stones and the angel Moroni. I mean, and these are modern, scientifically informed human beings who believe these crazy ideas.
There's this question of the beginning of things is, of course, very important. And if you think that it must have had a beginner as well as a beginning, that it's not just a design or an apparent design, but it must have had a designer, you are only asking for another question to be asked, which is, who created this creator? Who designed this designer? Who fixed up this prime mover? Who was the prime mover for that prime mover? The common word for this in logic and some philosophy courses is it's an infinite regression. It doesn't really get you anywhere, but as I say, it wouldn't get you to religion, even if you could prove that there must have been a prime mover. It wouldn't get you to the worship of other human beings as if they were prophets or saviors or redeemers. It can't help you get there. You have to believe that as a matter of faith or not. You can't do it from physics. There's furthermore, I think, an almost insuperable ontological problem involved here. Suppose it to be true. Suppose that I concede it. Suppose there must be such a designer or an individual, an intelligence, something like a person that does this. How could I know it? Which person is smarter, sufficiently smarter, perhaps I should say, smart enough, smarter than me, smarter than anyone here, smarter, I dare say, even than Frank, to know this person and what's in his mind? I submit that it's not possible for another human being to tell you he knows this to be true, any more than it's possible for me to tell you, which I don't try and do, because I'm not unreasonable in this way, that I know it isn't true. But don't you see that there's all the difference in the world between my saying I can't know it and Frank saying, well, I can't prove it, because he wants you to believe it's necessary so that you will then become Christian. And I say that that's a leap that you simply cannot make, and you certainly can't make on the basis of evidence. And I think the religious would be much better to leave evidence alone where they don't excel and to concentrate on faith, where at least they can claim some kind of monopoly.
You're out in the meadow and you see an ant climbing up a blade of grass. She climbs and she climbs. If she falls, she gets back on the blade and climbs again. Climbs again, she falls, and she climbs and she climbs and she climbs until she reaches the very top of the blade of grass. And you might wonder, what on earth is the ant doing this for? What benefit accrues to the ant? Is she looking for food? Is she looking for a mate? Is she lost? Is she trying to get home? Wrong answers. In fact, no benefit at all accrues to the ant. Well, then, is this just a fluke? Yes, it's just a fluke. It's a brain fluke, a lancet fluke, Dicrocelium dendriticum, a parasitic little brainworm that has to get into the belly of a cow or a sheep in order to continue its reproductive cycle. What does it do? It commandeers a passing ant, climbs into the ant's brain, and drives it like an all-terrain vehicle up the blade of grass to a position where it is more likely to be eaten by a cow or a sheep. Host manipulation by parasites. Here's another one, sort of fascinating, very similar actually. Toxoplasma gondii is a parasite that infects mice. And in order to continue its life cycle, it has to get, in order to reproduce, it has to get into the belly of a cat. Well, now, what would you do if you were in a mouse and you wanted to get into a cat? You would turn the mouse into Mighty Mouse. Make the mouse bold, fearless, so it runs out in the open. That's what mice do when they are infested with Toxoplasma gondii. They're more likely that way to be eaten by a cat. What we have in these cases, we have a hijacker, the parasite that infects the brain and induces suicidal behavior on behalf of a cause other than one's own genetic fitness. Gosh, that's scary. Does anything like that ever happen to us? Yeah. Well, I want to remind you that the Arabic word Islam means submission. It means surrender of self-interest to the will of Allah. But Islam is not alone. In Christianity, we have the same theme. No other species, only us. We're the ones that can live for an idea, that can die for an idea. It's ideas, not worms, that hijack our brains. These are ideas that can copy themselves, that can make us copy them. Not only rehearsing them in our own brains over and over, but spreading them to our friends and our neighbors and our family, and populating the world with many copies of these ideas.
And it comes back to the point we made earlier about ideas not having human rights, because I think people think when we criticize religion, we're criticizing people who are religious, which couldn't be further from the truth, because we think they're victims too.
Absolutely. I mean, the word Islamophobia is all about that. People think that if you criticize Islam, you're criticizing Muslims. Quite the contrary, they're the primary victims of Islam.
I think one can tell a very great deal about a person or an institution or a society according as to whether it is believed that we, the species, or we or ourselves as individuals, are present here because of the laws of biology, in particular the laws of evolution by random mutation and natural selection, or whether we're here because of a divine plan. A great deal hinges upon whether or not you subscribe to one or other of those Weltanschauung or worldview. And the subtitle of my book on this subject, which is called God is Not Great, is How Religion Poisons Everything. And sometimes I get taken up on that. People think that I must have said it or put it like that just to get an arresting subtitle as a sort of sales tactic or so forth. They say, what do you mean, really everything? Italian food, tantric sex, chess, what you will. And I say, as a matter of fact, yes, I do mean everything, because I think that the cult of faith and the instinct to worship and to prostrate ourselves, to practice religion, or have it practiced upon us, in other words, is poisonous of everything because it attacks us in our deepest and most intimate and essential integrity. It says to us, in effect, that we don't have free will, and that we don't have the right to decide for ourselves on what is right. We can't tell a right action. People say to me, not realizing how insulting the question is, how would you have morals if it wasn't for God? How would you know? I pause here just to say, and I think on the campus of a university named for Roger Williams, it'll be readily intelligible why I think that's insulting. One of the reasons, I think, is this. If I'm hearing this from one of the practitioners of organized religion, I'm not going to grant them the assumption that they so readily make in their own favor, that they already know by being Christian or Muslim or Jewish more about morality than I do. I mean, shouldn't it be that those who practice organized religion should begin by making a few apologies for themselves on this score? How dare they say that I'm on their turf when we're talking about ethics and morality? It isn't I who mandate things like the mutilation of the genitals of children, for example, which is in all cases a religious commandment. It isn't I who ask for suicide and murder to be fused into one action in the name of God. The suicide-murder community is almost exclusively, not absolutely 100%, but very nearly exclusively a God-fearing and faith-based one. How dare the assumption be made that we can't talk about these things without a license from some kind of church?
I've recently in the United States stated that teaching creationism is child abuse, and I think it is. Namely, if you withhold knowledge or you do anything to children that puts them at a competitive disadvantage as adults, it's child abuse. It's mild forms of child abuse, but it's like withholding medicine, withholding knowledge that later on will cause kids to become less competitive because evolution is the basis of modern biology, and teaching things that are basically lies, even if they're well-intentioned, is child abuse. I mean, it's not that people are doing this to be evil, but they're hurting their children, especially, of course, telling kids they're going to go to hell. That's definitely child abuse. It is inappropriate, and teachers not only should not be doing this, but in fact, if they are, they should be removed, in my opinion, because the purpose of education, as I've often said, is not to validate ignorance, but to overcome it.
Ask yourself common sense. If you were a divine being, say you had an ant colony that you made in your house, would you be offended if those ants didn't pay homage to you 5 times a day? And if they didn't look up to you or didn't recognize your existence, would you destroy them? No, I mean, it just seems so petty. So why should we believe in a hateful, unmerciful, petty, sadomasochistic, homophobic, sexist God? It's just irrational. It's not sensible. There's nothing. And the point is, I don't want to single out Islam here. And I know I'm offending some people, but the same is true for the God of Moses. If you really believe that the scriptures were literally true, the morals in that book are reprehensible.
Faith is really just believing in something for which you have neither rational arguments nor good evidence. William Clifford, who wrote a very nice essay about faith, using as an analogy a ship owner who was about to send to sea a ship full of immigrants. This ship owner that Clifford imagines is uncertain whether his ship is seaworthy enough to make the long voyage to bring the immigrants to the new land. But he thinks about it and he says, well, look, after all, there's a divine providence. And how could a divine providence allow these good people who are going to establish their futures, men, women, and children even, who are, at least the children, innocent of any sin, how could he allow them to drown on the way to the new world? So I will have faith in God, and I won't bother to inspect the ship to see whether it's seaworthy, because I have faith that it will reach Australia. Well, of course, as I say, we know that some ships did not, and we would fault this ship owner and say, you can't just have faith in that way. You need to check the evidence. You need to look at it. the ship owner's faith would have put lives at risk, and unfortunately in the real world today, faith also puts lives at risk. In fact, the refusal of the Roman Catholic Church to tolerate the use of condoms, even in regions of sub-Saharan Africa where the risk of contracting HIV/AIDS is extremely high, has undoubtedly not merely put lives at risk, but cost perhaps millions of innocent human lives. We pay a high price for the religious faith of some religious leaders.
Religion is not provided to us by revelation. It doesn't come from the heavens. It doesn't come from the beyond. It doesn't come from the divine. It's man-made. And it shows. It shows very well that religion is created, invented, imposed by a species half a chromosome away from the chimpanzee. It shows, doesn't it?
Science and spirituality are complementary, not conflicting, additive, not detractive. Anything that generates a sense of awe may be a source of spirituality. Science does this in spades. I'm deeply moved, for example, when I observe through my 8-inch telescope in my backyard the fuzzy little patch of light that is the Andromeda Galaxy. It's not just because it's lovely, although it is, but because I understand that the photons of light landing on my retina left Andromeda 2.9 million years ago, when our ancestors were tiny-brained hominids roaming the plains of Africa. So what science tells us is that we are but one among hundreds of millions of species that evolved over the course of 3.5 billion years on one tiny planet, among many orbiting an ordinary star, itself one of possibly billions of other solar systems in an ordinary galaxy that contains hundreds of billions of stars, itself located in a cluster of galaxies not so different from the millions of other galaxy clusters themselves, whirling away from one another in an accelerating, expanding cosmic bubble universe that very possibly is only one among a near infinite number of bubble universes. Herein lies the spiritual side of science, the sensuality, if you'll pardon an awkward neologism, but one that echoes the sensuality of discovery. If religion and spirituality are supposed to generate awe and humility in the face of the Creator, what could be more awesome and humbling than the deep space discovered by Hubble and the cosmologists, and the deep time discovered by Darwin and the evolutionists? Darwin matters because evolution matters, and evolution matters because science matters, and science matters because it is the preeminent story of our age, an epic saga about who we are, where we came from, and where we're going.
Look at the alternative we are forsaking. The alternative is a truly open-ended, unconstrained discourse about the human experience. I mean, the fact is, people have spiritual experiences. I mean, you've used this word transcendent a lot. Who knows what that means? Well, the reality is, it is possible for a person to close their eyes and use their attention in a certain way, such that they no longer feel separate from the universe, say. You know, they felt it was just me a moment ago, and then all of a sudden there's just the world, okay? That is an experience that is replicable, that we can all have, that many of us, I'm sure, have had. Most people, most of the time, have had these experiences in the context of a religious tradition, and they have interpreted them by the light of their religious tradition. The problem with this process is that it is not, in the scientific spirit, encouraging of rigorous honesty. It is encouraging of dogmatism and metaphysical speculation, and yes, there are diamonds in the dunghill of religion. I mean, it's, you know, Rumi and Meister Eckhart are attesting to a kind of experience that I think we should all be desperate to have. The problem is we need to talk about it honestly, and I think the first thing you can notice about this is if a Christian is having a glorious experience of self-transcendence, and a Buddhist is having a glorious experience of self-transcendence, one thing you know for certain, the best interpretation of that data can't be that Jesus is the Son of God put here on earth to redeem our sins. I mean, that it can't, it does not authenticate what the Christian thinks it's authenticating. It doesn't authenticate what the Buddhist thinks it's authenticating. We no longer have a right to our religious provincialism. We just have to talk straight.
Even as Verdi wrote his Requiem, he didn't believe in God. He didn't need to believe in God to produce that beautiful music. It isn't true that secularism can't produce a cathedral or an opera. It is true, however, that a secular civilization will have to keep what is valuable of the beauty and symmetry of religious art and devotional architecture, while rejecting the supernatural and the superstitious. You see, the supernatural and the superstitious are not the same as the numinous and the transcendent. I don't come before you, atheist and materialist as I am, as someone who simply says that Douglas Wilson and I are two competing bottles of Dr. Pepper. Nor do I come before you as someone who says I was created out of dust, or as the Quran would say, out of a clot of blood, that I'm an abject serf, that I'm a piece of nothingness fashioned out of garbage by a capricious, tyrannical God. That's an even worse insult. I'd rather be Dr. Pepper than that, I have to tell you.
Me too.
But now let's contrast the numinous and the transcendent to the superstitious and the supernatural. Francis Collins, Christian believer, great physician, great scientist, great humanitarian. He goes on a long hike into the mountains, and he comes to, on his hike, to a point where there's a triune waterfall, a 3-in-1 waterfall falling, and yet arrested in its fall because it's frozen. It's a frozen water trinity. He says, in his own account, he says, at that point, when seeing it, I fell to my knees, and I accepted Jesus Christ as my personal Savior. Some of you may have had similar experiences, I don't know. I'm immune to this kind of thing, but I'm not indifferent to it. It is, of course, very beautiful to see a 3-fingered frozen waterfall. What if it had been 4 fingers and not a trinity? Would he not have accepted Jesus Christ as his personal Savior? Let's be serious. This stuff is not true. It is superstition. It is the way the mind searches for form and will find it if it's looking for it, and looks for symbols and looks for miracles and revelations where they're not really there, and is terribly easily satisfied by tiny little bits of pseudo-magic. But if you want to be awe-inspired, ladies and gentlemen, and let me just tell you that those of us who do not believe we are divinely created, let alone divinely supervised, are not immune to the idea of awe and beauty and the transcendent. Let me invite you to look for a moment at the pictures taken by the Hubble telescope. Some of you may have done it. If you haven't done it now, or yet, do it soon. The extraordinary revelations of swirling, yet somehow beautiful new galaxies in color and depth and majesty, like nothing I think the human eye has ever seen. Turn away from that if you wish, and gaze at a burning bush in an illiterate desert part of the Middle East and say that that's where revelation comes from. I don't believe you'll be able to do it. Or read a page of Stephen Hawking on the absolute magnificence and consistency and underlying beauty. As Einstein says, the great miracle of physics is there are no miracles. It all carries on, holding together all the time. There are no interruptions in its order. There are no suspensions of it just to please Joshua or just to please some sect or tribe or group. No, it's much, much, much more impressive than that. Hawking has a colleague who looked at the event horizon of the black hole. If you could travel towards a black hole, in theory, the event horizon is the point at which the black hole is pulling everything into itself. So over into the black hole goes light itself. It's so strong it can pull light back into itself. It's really awe-inspiring. A lot more, say, than a crowd of pigs infested by devils running down a hill into the sea, which is a piece of sorcery and cheap magic of the sort that shouldn't impress any thinking person. Think about a black hole instead. Pulling the light into itself, the event horizon just reorganizing nature. So that if you could get to that lip, the lip of that event horizon, and fall in, and go in, you could, in theory, see the past and the future stretching before and in front of you. You would see time, except you wouldn't have the time to do it, of course, if you were a mere primate, as we are. But Hawking has a colleague who says if he knew he was dying of a terminal illness, that's how he'd want to go out, is over the lip of the event horizon. That would be majesty. That would be magnificence. That would be awe-inspiring. That would be apocalyptic. So it's in the natural world, it's in the world of science and the world of innovation and discovery and doubt. We wouldn't have discovered any of these things if we'd taken the religious story for granted to begin with. We would have said, we already know enough. We know. God made this. God wants it this way. What's the need for inquiry? We already have all the information we need. The big difference between this side of the house, mine, and the other, is this. I am absolutely certain that I do not know, but that it might be possible to find out, and that doubt and skepticism and innovation and inquiry are the only means by which wonder and beauty and awe and symmetry will be discovered, and beyond those peaks we can yet see, new, more wonderful peaks will rise. Whereas, on the Wilson side of the house, it is said, we already have the certainty. We know that God created us, and we even claim to know his mind and what he wants of us. And I just invite you to open your minds to the possibility that the skeptical and the inquiring and the doubtful will be better than anything that calls itself faith. Because anything that calls itself faith calls itself certainty. And for certainty, I think there is no place in an institute of intellectual mentation and higher education. And I'm very grateful to you all for giving me the chance to say so.
Only one species knows what it is made of, atoms belonging to a known list of elements, and it knows what atoms are made of, up quarks, down quarks, and electrons. Only one species knows how to discover such things, the scientific method which belongs to all humanity. Faint hearts find it a bleak and cold conclusion that we are machines made of atoms living finitely on a rock spinning around an ordinary star hanging in a vacuum in the suburbs of a galaxy, one galaxy among billions. But the universe owes us no comfort, and there is a savage nobility in standing up to face the truth. I cannot think of a better way to enjoy our transient brush with reality than to work at understanding it. Science is the poetry of reality, zenith of human achievement, jewel in our species' crown.